Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Blood is slippery, a fact Julian knew intimately, but usually it was someone else's blood slicking his hands, not his own life force pooling rapidly on the sterile linoleum of an emergency room floor. The gurney slammed through the double doors, the wheels shrieking in protest, a cacophony of shouting voices swirling above him like vultures. Julian Vane, the underworld's most efficient cleaner, the man who walked through shadows without making a sound, was currently reduced to a breathless, ragged mess of torn silk and failing organs. A serrated blade had found its way between his ribs, a sloppy mistake, a reckless gamble in a negotiation gone wrong. The pain was a white-hot supernova in his side, but it was the cold creeping up his extremities that terrified him. He blinked, trying to clear the static from his vision as the harsh, blinding halogen lights overhead tore through his retinas. BP is crashing. 80/50. We're losing the pulse in the distal artery, a nurse screamed, her voice shrill with panic. Get the trauma kit. Now, a voice cut through the chaos. It was a baritone. Deep, resonant, and colder than the liquid nitrogen they used to burn off warts. It was a voice that commanded immediate, trembling obedience. It was also a voice that made Julian's stopping heart stutter and kick against his ribs with a violence that had nothing to do with the hemorrhage. Julian forced his heavy eyelids open, fighting the encroaching darkness. Through the haze of agony, a figure loomed over him. A white coat, pristine and sharp. A surgical mask was being pulled down for a split second to bark an order, revealing a jawline that could cut glass and lips that Julian had memorized with his tongue a lifetime ago. Dr. Elias Thorne, the chief of trauma surgery, the golden boy of the medical world, and the man whose heart Julian had shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces 5 years ago. Elias's eyes, the color of a stormy sea, locked onto Julian's. There was no shock in them, only a glacial, terrifying recognition. He didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch. He snapped a pair of latex gloves onto his hands with a sharp thwack that sounded like a gunshot in the cramped bay. He leaned down, his face inches from Julian's sweating, pale forehead. He pressed a thumb directly into the wound, staunching the flow with brutal efficiency. Julian gasped, a ragged sound of pure torture, arching his back off the gurney. Elias didn't offer comfort. He didn't whisper sweet nothings. He leaned closer, his voice a dangerous whisper that only Julian could hear over the din of the medical machines. You've been reckless since we split? The anesthesia was a mercy Julian didn't deserve, but when he woke, the mercy was gone. He was no longer in the chaotic general ward. He was in a private suite, the kind reserved for politicians and heavy donors. The walls were a muted, expensive gray, the air smelled of lilies and high-grade antiseptic, and the only light came from the city skyline glowing through the floor-to-ceiling window. Julian tried to move, to assess the damage, but metal clinked against metal. He froze. He tugged his right wrist. It was cuffed to the railing of the hospital bed, not with police-issue steel, but with a soft, leather-lined restraint that looked deceptively medical, yet held with unforgiving strength. I wouldn't struggle. You'll tear your stitches. Julian turned his head. Elias was sitting in a wingback chair in the corner of the room, legs crossed, reading a medical chart on a tablet. He had shed the blood-spattered white coat. Now, he wore a charcoal dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were deceptively muscular for a man of science. He looked exhausted, shadows bruising the skin beneath his eyes, but his posture was rigid, regal. Elias, Julian croaked. His throat felt like he'd swallowed broken glass. Elias didn't look up. Dr. Thorne, he corrected, his tone flat. Or did the blood loss erase your manners along with your survival instinct? Since when do doctors handcuff their patients? Julian rattled the restraint again. Since the patient is a flight risk with a history of disappearing into the night without saying goodbye, Elias said, finally lowering the tablet. His gaze was heavy, physical in its intensity. And considering I just spent 6 hours reconstructing your spleen and sewing your oblique muscles back together, I'm not keen on you ripping my work apart, because you have a phobia of commitment. Julian fell back against the pillows, the fight draining out of him. The pain medication made his head swim, dulling the sharp edges of his usual defenses. Seeing Elias was like seeing a ghost, but a ghost that had grown more solid, more formidable than the living man he'd left behind. "I didn't think you worked at St. Jude's," Julian murmured. "I run St. Jude's," Elias corrected. He stood up and walked to the bedside. He checked the foredrip with professional detachment, his fingers brushing Julian's arm. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through Julian's veins that no sedative could dampen. "You look good, Elias. And you look like a roadmap of bad decisions," Elias countered. He reached out, his cool fingers tracing a jagged, older scar on Julian's collarbone, just above the hospital gown. "This one wasn't here 5 years ago. Or this burn on your shoulder. Hazards of the trade." "The trade," Elias scoffed, a bitter sound. "Is that what we're calling it? When I met you, you were a reckless law student with a penchant for underground poker. Now, you're a ghost story criminals tell their children." "I saw the entry wound, Julian. That wasn't a mugging. That was an execution attempt." Julian looked away, staring out at the city lights. "I handled it. You died on my table twice," Elias said softly. The anger in his voice cracked, revealing a deep, festering wound. "I had to restart your heart. I had to reach into your chest and massage it until it decided to beat again. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" Julian closed his eyes. He remembered the feeling of Elias's hands in a very different context. Flashback. 5 years ago. The university library was dusty and smelled of old paper. Julian had cornered Elias in the back of the stacks, hidden away from the prying eyes of the study group. Elias was shaking. He was the dean's son, the straight-A student, the boy who had his life mapped out in a straight, heterosexual line to a wife, a picket fence, and a chief of surgery title. "I can't," Elias had whispered, clutching his biology textbook like a shield. "Julian, I'm not. I don't do this." Julian had stepped closer, trapping Elias against the shelf. He was the corruption, the ink drop in the clear water. He had smirked, confident and arrogant. "You don't do what, Eli? You don't want me? Or you're scared of how much you want me?" Julian had leaned in, brushing his lips against the shell of Elias's ear. "Let me show you. Let me ruin you for anyone else." And he had. He had taken the pristine, untouched Elias and introduced him to passion, to desire, to the dizzying highs of a love that defied the rules. Elias had fallen hard, with the intensity of a man who does nothing by halves. He had planned a future. He had come out to his parents, burned bridges, all for Julian. And then, when Julian's debts to the syndicate became too dangerous, when he realized that staying meant putting a target on Elias's back, Julian had done the only thing he knew how to do. He ran. He left a note on the pillow and vanished, believing he was saving Elias from a life of violence. In flashback. "I did what I had to do," Julian whispered in the hospital room. "Back then. And tonight." Elias grabbed Julian's chin, forcing him to look back. The doctor's eyes were blazing. "You left me. You woke me up to who I was. You made me realize I was gay. You made me fall in love with you. And then you threw me away like a used scalpel. Do you know what that did to me? It made you successful." Julian deflected, trying to summon his usual bravado. "Look at you. Chief of surgery. You're the king of this castle. I buried myself in work because it was the only place I couldn't feel the absence of you," Elias hissed. "I became cold. I became ruthless. I became exactly the kind of man who could stitch up the love of his life without shaking, because I killed the part of me that feels fear years ago." He let go of Julian's chin and stepped back, smoothing his shirt. The mask of the professional slid back into place, but it was thinner now. "I'm keeping you here for observation. 3 days. Minimum. I have business to attend to. People will be looking for me," Julian argued, pulling against the restraint. "Let them look. My security team is better than whatever street thugs you're running from. No one gets onto this floor without my biometric clearance." Elias walked to the door. "Get some sleep, Julian. You're going to need your strength for the physical therapy. And for the conversation we're going to have when you're sober." "Elias, unlock the cuff." Elias paused at the door, his hand on the dimmer switch. He looked back, and a dark, possessive smirk curved his lips, an expression Julian had never seen on the sweet boy he used to know. This was a man who had learned to wield power. No, Elias said. You wanted to teach me about control 5 years ago, Julian? You wanted to show me the dark side? Well, congratulations. I learned. You're in my world now. And in my world, the doctor gives the orders. The lights dimmed to pitch black, leaving Julian alone with the steady, rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the terrifying realization that the boy he had left behind had become a predator far more dangerous than himself. The second day was a battle of wills. Julian refused to eat the hospital gruel. Elias arrived with a steak dinner from a 5-star restaurant across the street and sat eating it in front of him until Julian caved and accepted a bite. Open, Elias commanded, holding a forkful of seared filet mignon. I'm not an invalid, Julian snapped, though his stomach growled betrayingly. His right hand was still cuffed. You have an abdominal incision that cuts through 3 layers of muscle. You are an invalid until I say otherwise. Elias waited. Open. Julian opened his mouth. The humiliation burned hotter than the wound, but the food was divine. As he chewed, he watched Elias. The man was meticulous. He cut the meat with surgical precision. He drank his wine, a deep, blood-red vintage, with slow, deliberate sips. Why are you doing this? Julian asked after the third bite. If you hate me, just discharge me. Let me bleed out in an alley somewhere. Elias set the fork down. The silver clinked sharply against the china. Is that what you think? That I hate you? You should. I tried, Elias admitted. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. God, I tried. I dated. I met beautiful men. Doctors, lawyers, models. Safe men. Men who didn't carry knives in their boots. But every time they touched me, I felt nothing. You ruined me, Julian. You carved your name into my psyche so deep that no amount of time could scrub it out. I left to protect you, Julian blurted out. The truth he had held for 5 years finally spilled over. Elias froze. What? My father. He wasn't just a gambler. He owed money to the Vipers. When he died, the debt passed to me. They found out about you. They threatened to grab you to ensure my compliance. I had to become one of them to pay it off. I had to leave you to keep you off their radar. Julian's voice trembled. I broke your heart to save your life. Silence stretched in the room, heavy and suffocating. Elias stared at him, his expression unreadable. He stood up slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the rain that had begun to lash against the glass. You arrogant idiot, Elias whispered. Excuse me. Elias spun around. You decided for me. You decided I was too weak to handle it. You decided my safety was worth more than my choice. It was, Julian shouted, straining against the cuff. Look at you. You're alive. You're successful. If I had stayed, you'd be dead in a ditch or leveraged by a cartel. Or maybe, Elias walked back to the bed, his eyes darkening. We could have fought them together. Maybe I would have burned the city down for you. Did you ever think of that? He loomed over Julian, placing his hands on the mattress on either side of Julian's head. You treated me like a porcelain doll, Julian. But you forgot that porcelain is made in fire. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. He unlocked the leather cuff. Julian rubbed his chafed wrist, looking up warily. You're letting me go? No. Elias grabbed Julian's wrists, both of them this time, and pinned them above his head with one hand. The strength was shocking. Julian, weakened by blood loss and shock, couldn't break the hold. I'm done letting you make the decisions, Elias growled, his face inches from Julian's. You said you left to protect me from the Vipers? Fine. But who protects you from me? Julian's breath hitched. The proximity was intoxicating. The scent of Elias, sandalwood, sterile soap, and underlying male pheromones flooded his senses. I don't need protection. You do, Elias murmured, his gaze dropping to Julian's lips. You're reckless. You're self-destructive. You think you deserve to suffer for your sins. But you're wrong. You belong to me. You always have. Since that day in the library. Elias. Say it, Elias commanded. Say you still want me. I never stopped, Julian confessed, the fight leaving him completely. Every night. Every scar. It was all you. Elias crashed his lips onto Julian's. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a reclaiming. It tasted of 5 years of anger, of desperate longing, of iron and wine. Julian groaned, arching into the touch, his fingers tangling in Elias's hair. The pain in his side was forgotten, replaced by a searing heat that radiated from where their bodies pressed together. Elias broke the kiss, breathless, his pupils blown wide. He rested his forehead against Julian's. "You're not leaving this hospital until you're healed. And when you are, you're coming home with me. My penthouse has better security than this place. And I'm not asking, Julian. I'm telling you." Julian looked up at the man he had turned, the man who had once been a shy student and was now a dominant force of nature. He realized with a jolt that the dynamic had shifted. He was no longer the corruptor. He was the one who had been captured. And for the first time in 5 years, Julian didn't want to run. "And if the Vipers come for you?" Julian asked, a last-week protest. Elias straightened up, adjusting his cuffs. A cold, terrifyingly calm smile played on his lips. "Let them come. I'm a trauma surgeon, Julian. I know exactly how to take a man apart so that he never puts himself back together. They want to touch what's mine? They'll find out that the doctor has a very steady hand." He leaned down and kissed Julian's forehead, a gesture of ownership. "Rest now. I have rounds to finish. But I'll be back." And Julian, "Yeah. Don't try to escape. I've upped your sedation dosage. You won't make it to the elevator." As Elias walked out the door, the hem of his charcoal shirt fluttering, Julian sank back into the pillows. He felt trapped, overwhelmed, and completely at the mercy of a man with a god complex. He smiled. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf, by letting the wolf realize he had teeth all along. If you enjoyed seeing Dr. Thorne take absolute control over his reckless ex, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a partner who left you to protect you, or is a secret breakup unforgivable? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.